WGPR Detroit HD2.
You're watching WHPS, Highland Park, Detroit. The views and opinions expressed on the following show are not necessarily the views and opinions of WHPS, its affiliates, management, or sponsors.
My name is Watson.
And my name is Mariah.
We're 12 years old.
And we're representing Old Redford Academy Middle School.
And we're here to talk about drugs.
Drugs are very dangerous and unhealthy.
And they can also ruin a relationship with your loved ones. Go talk to a family member, a friend, even a teacher, or you can go to a therapist, or if you need any extra help, you can go online and find all of those.
Hashtag not worth it.
And good afternoon, and welcome to Expose Under the Sun, sponsored by the Detroit Native Sun newspaper. I'm your host, Darwin Griffin, and we have a very, very informative next half an hour of news and information. So if you'd like to be a part of the call, you can call our numbers, our 313-868-0342, 313-868-0351 or 313-868-4336. And we are live, and we are sponsored by the Detroit Native Sun newspaper. And if you would like to join us, our website is .tv33whpr.com, and you are watching us live from the awesome cities of Detroit, Michigan, under the auspices of the Honorable Mayor Mike Duggan, and the phenomenal city of Highland Park, Michigan, under the auspices of the Honorable Mayor Hubert Yap. And just wanted to say before we get started, a happy belated birthday to my frat brother, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And just to give a little bit of information about King, a lot of people don't know, King graduated with a bachelor's degree at the age of 16, at the age of, and it was phenomenal that he got his bachelor's degree so young. And he also, as many of you know, he received the Nobel Peace Prize when he was only 35 years of age in Oslo, Norway. So we just have to make certain that we don't service anyone and bring service to anyone just on his birthday. He would want you to be servicing the community every day of the year. So again, you cannot do more than that. And there were a lot of other birthdays that were celebrated yesterday. Service is the rent that you pay to live here on this earth. A lot of people recognize that quote, and that quote was by another person who had a birthday yesterday, and that was Muhammad Ali, as well as the Golden Girl. Thank you for being a friend. Miss Betty White would have been 100 years old yesterday. And I can't think enough about Star Wars and think about Darth Vader. And a birthday was also celebrated by James Earl Jones, the actor. And then one other person that a lot of you recognize and know when I say the FLOTUS, the First Lady of the White House, it was Michelle Obama's birthday yesterday as well. So, and one last little note, one of my favorite singers had a birthday yesterday too, and that was Sade. So again, there were a lot of birthdays that were celebrated yesterday. And those of you that enjoyed a birthday celebration yesterday, happy belated birthday, as well as those that are celebrating birthdays today. So again, I just want to let everybody know that we're going to be talking about something that's going to be a very hot topic, and that's talking about looking at the biases when it comes down to weight and the racist origins of weight bias. And today my very special guest is Miss Cassie Jones McBride, and she is the founder of the International Fuller Women. Ms. McBride, thank you for coming on Expose Under the Sun today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's good to see you.
And now let's get started. So basically, what are some of the weight or fat biases when it comes down to weight discrimination?
Well, it's good to talk about what weight bias is. So weight bias or fat bias is really the aversion to or discrimination against people of size. So that would be people who are outside like the standard definition of thinness in our community. So any discrimination or fear of or aversion to people of size, that is considered weight bias. And that it could be overt, which and it could be covert. So covert meaning that, there's things that are in policy or the way that you are discriminated against that's not really, vocal. And there's also overt racism or overt weight discrimination rather, which is also, you can say it belongs to the racism conversation as well. But when you are laughed at or bullied or not promoted at work because of your the way you present, you don't get hired or you don't get promoted because of that. The pressure to be thin by your family or loved ones, that is overt weight bias.
So one of the things that I know that some people have a difficult time with is that, so if a person may be a little overweight, how are they referred to as? Because I hear some people use terms like girthy, full figure.
Yeah.
What is the more comfortable term that women would like to have addressed as?
Well, it really depends on the woman. I have no feelings about, how people want to identify. If they want to identify as fat, that's okay. Fat is what you have, is not who you are. If there is a section of people who think that they're thick or juicy or however you want to identify, that's fine. It all depends on what you feel comfortable in. There is a lot of stigma associated with the term obesity because that is used to further discriminate and stigmatize people. So the obese moniker is not really something that you want to, usually not held by many people. But thick, voluptuous, full figure, all those things.
So, because I know that it's interesting using some of the terminology that you just said, thick, voluptuous, juicy, those terms.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I keep hearing over and over again is that when somebody refers to somebody who may be slightly overweight, what would you consider to be slightly overweight? So it's like, I know a lot of times they usually look at the BMI,
right,
or the body mass index. And a lot of times it's based on your height, in terms of say on what your weight should be, depending on the height that you are. Is there kind of like a rule of thumb that people would probably use when you talk about that?
Well, sometimes it goes down to the industry that you work in to determine if you are overweight for that particular industry. Like, say, for instance, the modeling and fashion industry, if you're over a size 9 for runway, then that is considered a plus size model. If you are, well, it all depends on the industry that you're in, but the BMI index is something that originated like in a European model, so that it's something that really is an outdated way of measuring health and measuring what you should be in terms of your own comfortability. People who are like bodybuilders, for instance, could have a BMI that equals, yours or mine, but the perception and the presentation could be different. So BMI, using BMI as a measure of health, or a way that people can discriminate against you, is typically kind of aligned with how you move in the world, and you are really familiar with how people make those assumptions about you. In the medical profession, primarily the BMI is used as a measure of health, and so a lot of doctors, as an internal way that you can say that you are a physician, that you are steeped in the care of your patient, they have internal measures that say you have to talk about weight if they're over a certain BMI. It may not be why you are there to be treated, and your BMI or your weight has nothing to do with your health in that moment. But because it is at a certain level, then physicians are generally told to address the disease of obesity when you get in, as opposed to what you're there for. So that kind of further stigmatize you in terms of advocating for your own health, advocating for your own conversations with your doctors. And sometimes because of the stigma that you have and just getting into the door, and the first thing you do is get weighed, sometimes that trauma that you experience in trying to advocate for your own patient-focused care sometimes prevents you from even seeking care in general.
Did I hear you say disease obesity?
People term it as a disease of obesity. That is, again, a medical terminology that is really steeped in how you are built. So the World Health Organization deemed obesity as a disease when they were trying to quantify how to bill patients for the services to treat obesity. And just for insurance purposes and billing purposes, it makes it much easier to quantify that as a disease. Although the research at that time, when they made the designation back in 2004 or so, did not speak to that being a correlation.
Okay. Now, what are you finding are some of the origins of weight bias and fat phobias?
Well, there is a racist origin on fat phobia. So back when we were initially enslaved in this country, it was very easy to decipher who were enslaved. You of course had darker skin, and so obviously you were among the ones that were supposed to be enslaved. So as the decades went by and generations passed, there were a lot of mixed race connections happened. I would say largely due to rape on plantations, but definitely mixed race happening. So it was very difficult for you to distinguish visually who were supposed to be enslaved and who were not. And so the ways in which Europeans started to distinguish between people who were enslaved or newly freed slaves is how they presented. So the fact that you were overweight, or I don't like the term overweight, but because you were larger than other women in society, that means that you looked like you were Slavic, you were slower, you obviously didn't have any self-control, you were sexual, as black people were attributed to be more sexual, more just uncontrollable. And so because you were gluttonous, you were less likely to be nearer to God. And so it would allow Europeans then to look at how they could have a higher position in the community based on just that. So obviously you were closer to God, you have self-control, so your appearance of thinness meant that you had more opportunity, that you were a better person, and they kept the presentation of thinness that is at the most important.
Okay. So how do you identify when weight bias exists, and what can a person do about it?
Well, it's hard to sometimes identify what it is that you're being discriminated against. You know, I'm a black woman. I'm a woman. I'm a black woman. I'm a fat black woman. So you don't know when you walk into the room who you have to like defend, what part of you and what intersection of your life and your identity is one that is discriminated against in that moment. And so it takes a lot of learning and understanding what bias looks like and feels like. You know that you feel that you've been treated differently, but sometimes it's very difficult to quantify. But for instance, when you are in social dynamics and there is a conversation with somebody that you care about, friends and family, and they talk about, you know, how much you're eating, or if they have presumptions about you because of your size. Those are the instances where you can make those safe spaces and have those conversations with your loved ones, especially during holiday seasons when people are eating and then they look at you as if you shouldn't have anything because of the size that you are. So the ways in which you identify it is really nuanced, because sometimes it's hard to decipher because you don't know what you're up against because of the way the society is currently. But I think that if you feel discriminated against, you probably are. And it's good to have those conversations with the people who you feel are offending you, to decipher and have some community with them to see what it is that is at issue. They might not be open to tell you, but at least you have some safe spaces and processes in place where you can, you know, seek other spaces that you feel whole and supported and safe in.
Because, you know, it seems like since the pandemic hit, a lot of people, you know, stayed home. But then I've heard a lot of terminology where people talk about their COVID look. Could be their hair, you know, couldn't get their hair cut.
Definitely
or get their
weight,
hair
too.
done.
Yeah.
And then also in their weight. You know, a lot of people gained weight because they were sedentary. You know, they weren't going out and doing some of the things that they normally did prior to the, you know, to the pandemic. So what suggestions could you give to them, you know, because that may have gained that extra, you know, few pounds?
I want people to give themselves some grace in this moment. I mean, especially in the Black community, when there is a connection to family, especially in mourning, and repasts that you could not have. And there's so many people who lost so many people. Gaining weight is the least of our concerns in this moment. I think that we should allow us a grace, and also the presentation, our perception of beauty is created also by society's pressures and perceptions of us. So whatever weight that you gained doesn't have anything to do with your value or your worth. And you should be able to, especially in this moment of people reflecting on like their place in the world and their legacy now that we lost so many people. I think it's now more of a time as any to begin to honor the body that has protected you and carried you into this moment, that you are here and that you are trying to work through this pandemic, but you are still here and fighting through it, and you were able to maintain love and community with your family in the body that you have, and we should be able to honor that.
You know, because back in the day, I know people used to look at thinking that people had to be certain proportions, like 36, 24, 36, when they would describe supposedly an ideal, you know, woman, or had a figure like a Coke bottle, you know. But, and then the other thing too was looking at the Barbie dolls. You know, how a lot of times people would think that the Barbie dolls weren't a good reflection on Black, you know, girls or Black women.
Oh, real women.
Oh, exactly. So, you know, they've changed in the dimensions now, you know. But in the short period of time we've got left, this half an hour seems like it went by real fast.
Oh, it's almost over? My goodness.
Just almost. But tell more about the work that you do especially with persons that you see on a regular basis.
Well, I have been doing the work in body positivity and in fat justice since 2008 really. And so My work is expanded since we became 501c3 to expand in ways that we would talk about how people are discriminated against, or in policy as well, about how that impacts the way we live our lives. And so a lot of the work that I do is centered around the ways that people are persecuted based on their presentation or society's perceptions of them. So that extends to the LGBTQ community, that extends to people who don't have that hip to waist ratio that you mentioned. You know, a lot of times when we don't have that, you are devalued because of that, or your sexuality is removed because of that. And so I have those conversations as well. And also, Michigan is the only state in the country that has laws protecting against weight discrimination. There are some counties across the country, but Michigan is the only state. And it's kind of wrapped up in employment law and discrimination in that realm, but it still exists. So we have to make sure that we know our rights, especially in the workplace. When you don't have chairs that are comfortable for you when you're of size, you can demand to have accessibility options for you in the workplace. So things of that nature, I try to give light and honoring the stories of people who have different experiences in their bodies, and kind of lifting that work. And so I do a lot of healing circles. I do some policy work, in other spaces, and try to interject where weight bias could be important in informing legislation. So I try to lift it whenever I can.
And, and that's the other thing, too, because a lot of people, have to remember, too, when a woman has a child, there's a lot of weight that they've picked up, when they were in their childbearing, months. And then it's hard to go and lose that weight just, like that. So that's something that you work with those ladies to make certain in terms of say that if they want to go back, because usually the time is about 6 to 8 weeks, depending on how they deliver their child, as to when they can go back to work. But then, just like you were saying, chairs that may be able to accommodate, a person that you don't want to discriminate against. And then the same thing when it comes down to somebody working and not being discriminated based on their size. So if somebody wanted to get in contact with you to, adhere to some of the principles that you may want to disseminate to them, can you give your contact information to our audience real quick?
Yeah, it's Cassie, Cassy, at fullerwoman, FULLERWOMAN.org. Our website is fullerwoman.org. You're able to reach out to me at any point in time. I do some personal conversations if you like to have them. I also, I'm able to do community engagement, whether it be in Zoom or now that there's this variant, I'm not sure about meeting in person, but definitely when things are better, I can definitely hold space with you.
And so now, one other question I want to ask too before we wrap up: why does it seem like women are more concerned about their weight than men are?
Well, I think men are concerned with their weight as well. I mean, there's body dysphoria for men and for women. When you look at advertisements in the media and there's this thin woman that's in the advertisement, there's also a very slim, very svelte man as well. So men look at that and looked at that and saying that they have to have that presentation, that body type in order to get the woman that's in that picture. So they are affected by negative stereotypes about weight as well. So there is an encouragement in the gym to hurt themselves and do more than they should, and that their body could take because they're a man and they should be able to push through it. So men have body dysphoria also.
But I don't hear as much about the women. I mean, the men that may be going through symptoms like bulimia, where they're
we don't
going
hold
and
space
doing
enough for them to do that. There needs to be a cultural shift in conversation to where people are able to have those experiences and talk about them openly and honestly. There's not enough spaces where that happens.
So there needs to be more spaces that men can feel more comfortable
Absolutely.
in having that kind of conversation. Because I see a lot of men, they look at themselves and they realize they don't have that six-pack, where they may have a two-pack or a no-pack,
Right.
But, but it seems like a lot of men nowadays that I talk to, they like women that have a little bit more,
And weight bias also is steeped in patriarchy. Is men really dictating what women should look like? So that hasn't been really a standard that women hold men to, as much as they have dictated how women should present and portray themselves. So there's never really been responsibility that men held in that.
That's interesting because, I do hear that, sometimes that you hear where men may be a little bit more, trying to convince women to, lose a little bit more weight or, something like that. But then at the same time, too, it's good when men try and uplift their women, especially, if they may be going through some self-esteem issues based on weight. So my last question before we wrap
And also,
up.
thinness is not void of all those ways that we look at self-esteem too. People who are thin go through those same trials. They may not like their thinness. People connect with their body differently.
So they may want to add more weight.
They may want to
wanna eat
add,
more.
or they may just don't. And they may, as being thin as what we consider the ideal, they may still want to be thinner because of the ideals that we set in our community. So we have to be careful about how we presume that people are happy with their bodies if they have that hip to waist ratio that's desired, or if they are thinner. We have to be mindful that people have their own connection to their bodies.
Yeah, because it seems like a lot of families, especially when you have one daughter or one son that may be a little bit more heavier than the rest of his, siblings, it could be a little bit different right there.
And I've had events that I produced across, different parts of the world. I have produced events in Bali in Indonesia. I produced events in Canada, along with the director that we had there in Nigeria. So in those conversations in different countries, they want to know how they can fight against discrimination in school or when they go on holiday and they're not invited. Like it's like survival for them. And where in the U.S., primarily it's more about, making sure that we have clothing that is comfortable and that we have the same options. A lot of the work is steeped in fashion, especially for people of color, but the larger voices around weight discrimination and advocacy is usually voiced by white women. And so we have to also be able to lift the voices of people of color and how we're marginalized within our own movement.
Great point. We're going to have you back on the show again. Definitely. Give your contact information. We've got 1 minute.
Sure.
Just give your contact
It is
information.
Cassie, C-A-S-S-Y, at fullerwoman.org. Our website is fullerwoman.org.
Anything, lastly, Cassie, that you can tell to, especially a woman that might be, like you said, feeling like they're marginalized, about their weight or about their size? What give a quick little positive something that you can tell them?
Just love the body that you're in. It's the journey to self-love. It is not a destination. So there are things that you can find joy in within your body. There are people who love who you are, all of who you are, and you don't have to be a certain size or a certain presentation to be valued more. Your value and your worth is not defined by society's perceptions of who you are.
That's a great point. That's great. And that's good that that you say that. So definitely love the skin that you're in.
Love the skin you're in. And also we don't have to owe anybody the love that we have for ourselves either, because even though we're on a journey to self-love, doesn't mean that people have the right to discriminate against you or hurt you or harm you, because you are still in that journey to self-love. So we are deserving of the human right and decency and dignity to be in the body that we choose.
You heard that from Cassie Jones McBride. Cassie, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for
definitely
having
have you
me.
to come back on again.
Absolutely.
But you've been watching Expose Under the Sun, sponsored by the Detroit Native Sun newspaper. And if you'd like to advertise in the Detroit Native Sun News, you can contact Ms. Valerie Lockhart at area code 313-457-5944. And you can pick up copies of the Detroit Native Sun News pretty much all over the Wayne County, Oakland, and Macomb County areas. So again, thank you, Cassie, for being my guest on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
You've been watching Expose Under the Sun. Have a great rest of this afternoon, and make certain to stay safe and stay healthy.